Hello and welcome to this video. My name is DJ Dietz and I'm going to be talking about Star Wars Episode 8. Now I just saw it, I was thoroughly blown away and I absolutely loved it. I felt it was enough Star Wars to be familiar yet not repetitive. It also expanded our understanding of the Star Wars universe, and I'm going to kind of spend the next 5 to 7 minutes talking about what I thought were some of the highlights of the movie, some of my fan observations, some of the themes that were explored with this movie, and just kind of in one take talk about what's going on. So like I said, I am doing this video in one take. There might be some cuts between things because I might repeat stuff, but generally this is a one take video. I'm not scripting this out, so this is kind of me talking about what I liked and why I thought it was one of the greatest Star Wars movies I've ever seen. So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've been following Star Wars ever since I first saw Star Wars when I was a little kid, and I've been following it ever since then, reading the stories and understanding the expanded universe as well as what's considered canon. I have a thorough understanding of everything that's in the canon world. I'm not thorough in the expanded universe or legends because there's just so much out there, but from what's canon ever since Episode 1 all the way up to the current episode as well as Rogue One, Star Wars Rebels, and the Clone Wars, I consider myself fairly well versed in that material. So I thought it was enough Star Wars to be familiar, yet I didn't think it was overly repetitive. With Episode 7, The Force Awakens, I felt it was kind of repetitive, and in talking with other Star Wars fans, they felt like it was kind of a rehash of A New Hope, especially with Starkiller Base and, you know, the Resistance as well as the First Order without the backstories of either being clearly established because it's 30 years after Episode 6, so we really didn't know what was going on. But I felt that this one, there was enough for it to be distinguishably and recognizably Star Wars, but not too super repetitive. And I know that this film has had a fair amount of criticism from a lot of fans, but you see, my only real criticism was Kylo Ren's scar. What was that? Did he put racetrack or asphalt on his face? I wanted to scratch that right off of his emo face. But no, all joking aside, there was some fair amount of criticism, and I think it's coming from the fact that a lot of the questions that were asked in Episode 7, like who Rey's parents were and who Snoke's identity was, that have kind of been filled in with a lot of fan theory, be that Jar Jar Binks is Snoke, or Mace Windu is Snoke, or he's Palpatine all over again. A lot of those fan theories hadn't come to fruition with Episode 8, and I think a lot of people were going into that hoping that these questions were answered. Also, it was a departure from the traditional structure of a Star Wars movie, and if we go with the paradigm that it's a mirror image of 4, 5, and 6, with Episode 7 being like Episode 4, this was like Episode 5, and I'll talk about the parallels between Episode 5 and this, but it wasn't a rehash of Episode 5, and there was definitely a lot of new material explored. So with that, let's go on to some of the new worlds that were covered. Obviously, this has spoilers in it, so if you haven't seen it, please go out and see it. You will not be disappointed. But some of the new worlds that we talk about, Anch To, which is this island world where Luke has been hiding out ever since he exiled himself from after Kylo Ren's betrayal. I think that the fact that it's an island symbolizes Luke being this bastion of hope and this bastion of light in a sea of darkness. I think that's kind of what I get with the island metaphor going on. There's also a sense of seclusion with it. Now, the real thing is a Irish or Scottish island, I believe. It's called Skellig Minor or something, and it's an island actually in the North Sea. I'll look this up afterwards and put that in the description, but it's an island in the North Sea, but it's really secluded, and it's got these ancient monasteries, and I think they did a really good job of incorporating that into the Star Wars universe, that it's this perfect way for him, almost like Dagobah was for Yoda, to explore the Force and be in close proximity to the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. With Yoda, he had the dark side cave. With Luke, he had the dark side hole, which was kind of the symbolization of the dark side and the light and the cold, and he kind of goes through that. We also see this fantastic discount Monaco, and I say discount in the sense that it's kind of like Monaco, but I absolutely loved it. It had a racetrack, it has casinos, it's where the galaxies and the galactic playboys and party boys go. I felt a lot of parallels between that and Cloud City, kind of with the Lando Calrissian vibe coming out of that, but it's basically this galactic epicenter where all the playboys go, and I really liked it. I thought it was really cool that it was this glitz and this glamour of a lot of cool galactic playboys. I think it was called something. Oh, I totally forgot what the name was, and I don't have it in my notes. So I will put the text of what the planet is right here, but my apologies, I don't have that written on my board. Anyway, now let's go on to some fan observations. I want to just take the time, because I was actually, when I was watching it, I had my little mental pen and paper and I was writing things down and making some notes. So my first big fan observation is parallels with episode 5. I think it parallels a lot with episode 5, but not overly so. I think there's a parallel between the Battle of Crate and the Battle of Hoth, and I think deliberately so. With Hoth, you know, you have the ice and the snow speeders with the AT-ATs or AT-ATs, whereas with Crate, you have the similar four-legged walkers, but now you have these salt skimmers, or these salt skimmers with the side things that are almost like bee wings, but they're like salt bee wings. Unfortunately, there aren't harpoons and grappling guns, and nobody's tripping over the walkers, but I thought that there were definitely parallels between Hoth and Crate, and especially deliberately so, I think in that case. With the guns and the trenches, it felt super Hoth to me. The next parallels between episode 5 is a character named DJ and Lando Calrissian, everyone's favorite scoundrel. DJ was the code breaker who was in jail with Rose and Finn when they're on the casino planet. The name is right here. Because I forgot it. So DJ is that character that says that he can break into anything, any Imperial code, and he ultimately sells them out to the Empire and betrays them for a large amount of money. And I found a lot of parallels between him and Lando. They're in this like they find each other in this rich and famous paradise, and they ultimately sell out the main characters like DJ does with figuring out what the Resistance plan is and that they're going for the tracking device, and with Lando, of course, that they're going to Cloud City. So they both kind of sell each other and they sell their friends. The next parallel is the idea of outrunning the Empire. The majority of episode 5 is spent with the Millennium Falcon outrunning the Empire and trying to get ahead of the Empire. I think the same way is said with episode 8, especially with, you know, we have 18 hours of fuel, we're on this big command ship, and we're trying to outrun them, and we're just out of range so our shields can still hold. And I think that that's a really cool parallel, and especially draws the distinction of this is Star Wars. Although there might be, you know, these secondary conflicts of like power struggles within the ship, it's still Star Wars. There's still a chase between a Star Destroyer and the Rebellion ship, and that's a really big parallel. The final parallel between episode 5 and this one, I think, is the idea of bad guys telling the truth. In episode 5, we have that very famous scene where Luke is in Cloud City, you know, hanging onto the railing. Obi-Wan said, "You killed my father." "No, Luke, I am your father." And I think that that's really interesting here when we see this with Luke Skywalker being the teller of the false truths, in the sense that Luke tells Rey that Ben or Kylo tried to kill him, and that was the turn to the dark side, and that's why he exiled himself. But Kylo, in this like telepathy moment between him and Rey, tells that in fact Luke tried to kill Kylo. Luke tried to kill Kylo, and Kylo realized at that moment Luke couldn't be trusted, and that's when he converted to the dark side. And then we kind of get Luke backtracking a sec when Rey confronts Luke about this. Luke is like, yeah, in a moment of weakness, I saw the dark side within him and realized he was too far gone. So in a moment of weakness, I snapped open my lightsaber, but he saw me and there were consequences. Which I thought was a really cool that he was owning it after he was confronted, much like we saw with Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan during episode 6. So the idea that truth to the protagonist, if you will, comes from bad guys. The next idea I want to talk about is this idea about force ghosting, this other fan observation. We see 2 confirmed instances of force ghosting, and I'm going to suspect there's going to be a third. The first was Luke. Luke is force ghosting Kylo in the end when there's that big standoff, and Kylo's like, "Fire every single gun on that man," and Luke walks off and, just like a badass that he is, brushes off his shoulder. I love that moment. And then that's still like total force ghosting, right? Because he's on Anch To, that island, and he's like force ghosting Kylo, and Kylo's like reacting to him and buying the rebels time, and Hux says it himself. Hux is like, "Don't get distracted with the man," although Kylo, you know, so hellbent with his emotions, attacks Luke and realizes he's just a force ghost. We also see the force ghost of Yoda, and in the force ghost of Yoda, you know, he destroys the tree of light with lightning, and that's really cool, and he tells Luke, you know, you need to forget about the past and how these books aren't real page turners. That's the second instance of force ghosting. The final suspected instance of force ghosting is a suspicion of mine that I have, that I think Snoke is going to make a reappearance in the next movie, because he's just kind of this like force dark side. His control of the dark side is so great that for him to die the way he did with Kylo to just like send the lightsaber through, that just seems kind of like he's selling himself short, especially when we see his powers with the Force and his powers in, you know, in tricking Rey to come there. I think he's probably tricking and he might actually be Force ghosting. That's just a thought. Another cool fan observation that I want to talk about is the idea of the Jedi Tree of Life in the Book of Wills. So keen observers of the Star Wars family will know that the original Star Wars movie was called The Story of Luke Starkiller as Told from the Book of Wills, Episode 1, The Star Wars. And I think it's really interesting because we see the Book of Wills and we see the Jedi Tree of Life, which kind of looks like that, much like the Jedi symbol. So, you know, we see that the Jedi symbol and the symbol for the Resistance comes from the Jedi Tree of Life, which I thought was really cool. And we're also seeing the Book of Wills, so Luke Skywalker isn't on Ahch-To, you know, because he wanted to. He's there because he's guarding the Book of Wills and kind of keeping the Jedi tradition alive. So as much as he'd like to have the Jedi end and die with him, he still has this glimmer of hope inside him that he is supposed to resurrect the Jedi and he's going to be their savior. I want to talk about the major themes that are carried throughout the movie. The first one is an obvious one, and it's something that's hallmark to all the Star Wars movies, which is the idea of hope. Hope is something that shows up in literally every Star Wars movie. I think Jyn Erso says it best in Rogue One, where she's like, rebellions are built on hope. You know, that's so much of the Star Wars universe is on hope, where we have characters hoping on unlikely odds. You know, Han Solo is telling C-3PO, never tell me the odds. Where we have characters betting on unlikely strategies because they have the glimmer of hope within them that they can win. They're betting all their resources on a like 21-year-old farm boy being able to shoot a 3-meter wide thermal exhaust port in the Death Star. The entire Star Wars saga is a bunch of people hoping that their plan's gonna work. And I absolutely love that because they're always living on the edge, they're always living in the moment, and they're always risky. And what we see with this episode is they don't always work. The plan that sounds so bulletproof, you know, we're gonna go in, we're gonna disable the tracker, and then we can jump to lightspeed and the fleet's gonna be safe, that doesn't work. Things don't go as planned, and there's still hope. And we see that there's this loss of hope, but then this regaining of hope. And I think with Luke Skywalker's appearance in the end, when, you know, when they're sending out the messages and Luke Skywalker comes, it's kind of talking about the answer of hope. And then it gets to the idea of rebellion, kind of building off of that theme. I know this might seem like really cheap for me to say, oh yeah, theme in this movie is the rebellion because we have the Resistance. No, but I think it goes a little deeper than that. Yes, we have the Galactic Resistance and they play a big part in this, but I think the idea of rebellion is a lot more nuanced than that. We see a number of instances of rebellion. We see rebellion within Kylo, rebellion towards his dark side, and rebellion towards the light side. He rebels from the light side because Luke has failed him as a master, and he rebels from Snoke in a number of ways, because first off, he doesn't kill Rey. He kills Snoke. He doesn't kill his mom, rest in peace Carrie Fisher. He doesn't kill his mom, General Leia. And he hesitates, so he's rebellion. There's this internal rebellion against his Kylo identity and his Ben Solo identity. So that's the idea of rebellion within Kylo. There's also the idea of rebellion within Poe Dameron and rebellion within the rebellion, because Poe doesn't like the chain of command that exists. Poe feels like he should be there, and his flyboy, you know, let's blow stuff up attitude, his mutiny, is rebellion within the rebellion. And then we also have Luke Skywalker rebelling against his mandate to train new Jedi, and he's kind of resigning from that. So he's rebelling from his destiny that was foretold to us in Episode 6, and he's rebelling from that. The next theme I want to talk about is the idea of sacrifice. I think sacrifice plays a really big role in this episode, where we talk about what we're willing to lose and what we're willing to save. I think, you know, Rose sums it up when she says, as the rebellion, we need to save what we love, not fight what we hate. And I just love that line, and I'm pretty sure it's going to stick with me for a while. And the idea is that what are we sacrificing, who are we not sacrificing, and what's becoming of that? I think some instances of sacrifice, especially with Admiral Holdo. Admiral Holdo jumps to lightspeed through Snoke's battlecruiser, which I think is a really badass move, reminiscent of what Jun Sato did in the Battle of Atollon for Rebels, and reminiscent of what Anakin Skywalker did in the Battle of Ryloth when he rammed his cruiser. He jettisoned an escape pod, but he rammed his cruiser into the droid control ship, neutralizing their blockade. Jun Sato, of course, had the carrier for the Rebels for Phoenix Squadron when they were guarding Atollon, and his sacrifice allowed Ezra Bridger to go and jump to lightspeed and get help. So the idea of sacrifice is something that's there in the Star Wars universe. We also see sacrifice, of course, with Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan Kenobi, when he sacrifices himself, strike me down, and he becomes even more powerful. We see sacrifice with Luke in the sense that Luke ultimately becomes one with the Force and says, "I'll be with you always." And we don't know if he's dead or not, or at what point his Force ghosting bridges or blurs the lines between dead and alive. But he definitely sacrifices. And we see sacrifice also like in Rogue One, where with like Cassian Andor, where like he's been fighting in this rebellion since he was like 7 years old, so he's sacrificed a lot. Everything I do it for you, for Galen Erso, he's sacrificing his Imperial career for glory in the sense that his daughter can have a good future. So sacrifice is a theme that's littered throughout the Star Wars universe and makes an appearance in Rogue One. The final one I want to talk to is also a theme that's maybe less explored in Star Wars, and it's the idea of the teacher-student relationship. We see, you know, the Master-Padawan relationship, and that dynamic is there throughout the Star Wars franchise, and it's explored in depth here with this movie, where we see the conflict within Luke between his want and desire to continue the Jedi, but then also his rebellion from the Jedi and his belief, and his belief that he has failed and the Jedi should end, and then, you know, the Jedi aren't the ones who should uphold the light side of the Force. So the idea of the teacher and student relationship. And then at what point is someone salvageable from the dark side? We have this back and forth throughout the movie between Rey and Luke. At what point Kylo is turnable or not turnable. So yeah, I know I wanted to keep this video 7 minutes, but I ended up being 10 minutes over, and I still didn't cover everything I wanted to cover. Fan observations I wanted to cover. I wanted to cover Help Me Obi-Wan Kenobi, You're My Only Hope. That made an appearance there. Super psyched to see that. Help Me Obi-Wan Kenobi, You're Our Only Hope, and that convinces Luke. That was the spark that convinces Luke to train Rey. That's something I wanted to bring up, but you know, unfortunately time-wise, I want to keep this video short, and I hope that you had a great opportunity to see the video, and hopefully this video has at least started a conversation and will hopefully make your Christmas. So Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. If you don't celebrate it, have a wonderful Monday. Hopefully you enjoyed the movie. I sure hope you do. As always, may the Force be with you. Thank you so much for watching.